My name is Josh Maltby. I've been a dungeon master for about 15 years now. I started out weird. I started out with Pokemon Tabletop United. I learned very quickly that that is not a good combat system. And you need a good combat system if you're going to run a TTRPG, because that's going to be a lot of your game, especially if your players like combat. I am one of the co-founders of Goblins and Growlers. We are a Dungeons and Dragons event company, and we, in the before times, we ran games at breweries for anyone who wanted to show up, sit down, and play. We'd create pre-made generated character sheets for them so that they could just come in, and as long as they had dice or someone who's willing to loan them dice, they could sit down, play some D&D, have a good time. So I'm going to pass it down the line here and have everybody introduce themselves.
Sure. My name is Neil Raymond Price. I'm the token non-goblin on the panel. So I'm also one of the token non-D&D players on here. I mean, I play D&D. I run it. I run Pathfinder 1E a bunch of times, which is D&D. But the bulk of what I do and design for is actually not for D&D. I've been running games for about 20 years. I've been writing them for about 15. And yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. I'm Brandon. I'm another one of the co-founders of Goblins and Growlers. Josh and I are kind of writing partners, and we generated most of the original content that we were running every week at these breweries. So it was like really tight deadlines, really hard turnaround times, and it had to be something cogent that people could really understand. I've been playing D&D since the mid-90s. I started on 2nd edition, and that didn't run me off. So I've just been hanging out since then.
My name is Alex Smith. I am one of the co-owners of Alpha Comics and Games up in Richmond, Virginia. I am also the DM for Goblins and Growlers actual play podcast, Quid Pro Roll, and occasional creepy, spooky one-page dungeon content creator for them. I have been DMing well over a decade. I do not remember how long more than that, though. And I've played every edition, and I'm still here, so yay!
And I'm Noah, and I'm a lawyer, but I'm a cool lawyer. I'm a video game and entertainment lawyer, specifically working, I also work in the tabletop realm. Specifically to this panel, I've also been a DM for over 10 years. I started off with 3.5 and then went back to basic set and then went to AD&D, which the two of those are very different, legally speaking. There's actually a lawsuit. And then have been running 5e stuff. And actually, I'm launching a new 5e live play podcast on Monday.
Yay!
Yeah. Also, he's our lawyer, so don't cross us.
I am literally their lawyer. And quick disclaimer. Do you mind if I do my disclaimer?
Do your disclaimer.
If I do say legal things today, or illegal things, as it may be, it is for informational purposes only. It is not specific advice. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, don't try this legal advice at home. Go to a friend's house. Okay.
This panel does not condone the cool crime of stealing.
Yeah. Or murder.
Quick tabletop disclaimer. Everything we're about to tell you is advice and not rules. much like every handbook for every system you've ever used.
It's a guideline.
So kind of to start things off, I want to talk about writing process. When you are first sitting down, you're first trying to create an adventure for a campaign or a one-shot. What does that look like? How do you get started so that you get kind of over that initial hump of, well, I want to do an adventure, but what is my adventure? What am I doing here?
We're going on the line or just
go for it?
Okay. So I like to know what setting I'm in. I always run a session 0 before every game. If it's a one-shot or just a one-shot adventure, that's a little bit different. But obviously, if you bring pre-gens, it's a little different. But if I have the time, I like to take an entire session and just do character creation and do genre expectation and setting of the scene. If you're going to do a 3-session adventure, which I think is like the best prime length for one of those things, then you can probably afford a 4th session 0. I like to, when I'm starting the writing process, I think of what I'm trying to convey in the entire adventure, what the high concept, the high moral is. And every scene I design after that, I try to at least write down, at least to myself, what I want the players to have taken away from that scene and what I want to have conveyed in that scene.
Yeah, I would say when Josh and I got started writing some of this stuff, I started writing it before Josh came on board with the company. So I would be up until like 3 o'clock in the morning the day before writing some of this stuff. I like to describe what we do for some of our brewery games as more like blue collar writing, because we're like, all right, got to get this done, got to get this done, got to get this done. So we'll start out just sort of along the same lines of what he was talking about, envisioning sort of our point A and our point Z, and then trying to divide up our drama into a couple of chapters. Because traditionally, we would run 3-hour adventures. We would start at the brewery at 6, we would end at the brewery at 9. So we knew we had to get somebody from one place to another place in the span of 3 hours. And we also had to write it with so much clarity that just the volunteer DMs could show up day of, get our stuff, and be able to run it without any questions. So very much boiling away things, simplifying things, creating some roadmaps for your DMs so you can sort of trust them to improvise while sticking with your skeleton.
So when I'm running a full campaign, especially something like I am with Quid Pro Roll, there are two different kinds of writing. One is the skeleton writing, which is the rough idea of what the story is going to be that they're going to go through, what is happening in the world independent of the characters. A lot of times that'll be like, what is the BBEG's evil plan? What's going on with this? And then after I've sat down and had a session 0 with my players and I've gotten sort of a rough outline of what their characters are and what they're trying to get out of their characters, then I start connecting things in and working their storylines into that skeleton. That's sort of the meat and muscles and organs. And I made this very gross very quickly.
It's okay.
That is generally like the 2-step level, but that is when games that I can like tweak and control on the fly. If you're writing something that's going to just go out there that you can't adjust as you're playing, generally you have to write it significantly broader and just kind of create that skeleton of what happens outside of them. And just kind of super duper hope that just, it's like sending a child off to college. You just got to hope they make the right choices.
Good. When I'm creating a longer campaign, well, frankly, whether it's a longer campaign or a shorter, like one-shot or a three-session kind of thing, I typically start exactly like these folks do, is figure out, okay, where am I going? What do I want to convey? And then after that, I say, okay, well, based on what I'm trying to convey, what genre am I really thinking in now? Am I thinking in horror? Am I thinking in something that's lighter, something like that? And then once I know that, I actually provide that to my players before they even really start with their characters and say, hey guys, this is what I'm thinking. What do y'all think? Just making sure, one, that they're comfortable with that setting. Because you want to create something where if somebody is enjoying their experience, and also then they can have their own ideas that kind of fit, and we have like a symbiotic relationship with the building. Because at the end of the day, it's collaborative. It's you're writing everything together. Now, obviously, if you're writing something that you don't know who your players are going to be, that's not how I would do it. I would figure out what you want to do, and then go and say, hey, here's some suggested stuff. But typically, when I'm running something for like on a professional level, I do that. Unless, of course, I'm doing an amnesia campaign where the players don't know what they're playing because they're going to wake up with blank character sheets, and then I just write everything.
Nice.
Well, what was the name of that actual play?
It's Forgotten Paths.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that seems somehow connected.
Come to our panel tomorrow night and you'll
can I
probably learn
jump
more
in?
about it.
Please jump in, Neil.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on something Alex said a little bit earlier. When you GM something, no module, no thing you write is going to survive first contact with the players. It's always going to go off the rails very quickly. But the skeleton she was talking about is really, really important. If you read through it all and you think about what the machinations are and you devise like a timeline of what occurs without the player's involvement, you'll have a much better understanding of what happens. And you can even design breakpoints where you can think about how players can influence events to go one way or another, and then you can design from that in a branching tree.
Yeah, to
going down.
comment on that a little bit, something that we hit on when we started writing things, like sort of what Noah was talking about too, like you're writing for people you don't know. You're writing for complete strangers who are just going to pick this up and play it. And it's really hard to craft the narrative, like if you're looking at it from like a literary perspective, because you want to be writing for a protagonist, but you don't have one, or they're going to be strangers to you. So I started tailoring the writing to the perspective of the major villain, and then just sort of wrote it as a tragedy of lots of bad things happening to the villain because the party was being successful. So you write it from the BBEG at the top of his ivory tower, like looking out on everything and him being like, damn it, damn it.
That's
damn it."
heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like we had a whole like 6-8 week arc of some supervillain who created some sort of magic space station to draw gravity and magic power from the sun or whatever. But anyways, it was really complicated, but we wrote it from his perspective, and it made it easier to inform the decisions that the players were going to be making because we actually had like a pivot point of his perspective. And it's sort of going backwards with it, but in that particular situation, it's kind of like one of the only ways you can go without running into constant roadblocks of like, well, what I don't know what my players would do because I don't know my players.
Even if you know your players really well, I can guarantee they will make decisions that absolutely baffle you on a regular basis.
Talk about the snake gun, Josh.
What? So, since we're writing all original content, we're writing all original adventures, I was like, we don't do a lot with traps. I want to do more with traps. What if there was like, like poison dart, like you step on the switch and poison darts shoot out of the wall. What if I did that, but with snakes? That would be cool. Think about how cool that would be. And I showed Brandon my concept, and I'm like, look at what I made. And he's like, someone is going to rip that out of the wall, and they're going to say, now I have a snake gun. And then they're going to shoot snakes at people. And I'm like, I have solutions for this. We could like disable that functionality. And he's like, no, we're leaning in. We are giving people snake guns.
Snake gun.
Yeah. Sure enough.
We had one player character who got himself a snake gun, and the party druid would shapeshift into a snake on a regular basis.
Yeah.
To be shot out of the gun at things.
That's amazing.
And then there was some other magic that was done on one of the non-druidic snakes where it had like really like high tension in its skin, so they could actually tie a rope to it and fire it like a grappling gun, like with its fangs and stuff.
So stupid.
Yeah, it is. It really is. But like,
Have you not met us and seen the content we create?
I'm your lawyer.
but yeah, that's an example of like, yeah, they're gonna try and do something stupid with that. Let's try and game it out ahead of time.
Always lean in.
Yeah.
Always lean in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, talking about where they're going to go, I had a seafaring campaign, and the idea in a seafaring campaign is stuff's going to happen, and it's going to be crazy, but you're on a boat, so where can you really go? I had one team that I was running for it, and they'd said, you know what, instead of fighting the Kraken, we're going to get swallowed by it. And I was like, okay, what's the plan? We're going to kill it from the inside. And so the next session that I had, we had in there, I was not ready for that. I'll be quite frank with you about that. That just they all would willingly get eaten by a Kraken.
I need to go to the bathroom and think for an hour, excuse me.
And so they got swallowed by the Kraken, and then the next session was them killing the thing from the inside. And then the snake thing is the reason I remember this. They found a creature inside of its stomach that was like a snake creature, and they killed it and turned it into a toboggan and went out the Kraken's ass. So it became Escape the Butt Kraken. But that is all to say, you cannot prepare for everything. Like as soon as they touch it, you're going to have to escape the Butt Kraken.
What, you don't have a butt kraken protocol in your TM notes?
I did not. I do now.
So kind of to that point, I would like to go down the line and just get like a couple of like quick tips for people who are still relatively new to adventure writing. Mm-hmm. They're creating their broad and all-encompassing campaign, but they're concerned that their players are going to create a snake creature toboggan and ride it out of a Kraken's butthole.
Yeah. For me, what's really helpful is to have something like a DMPC. Which is that a player character you control. Obviously, as the DM or GM, you're going to control the world. You're the referee of the world. You adjudicate everything. But one thing that I've utilized to pretty good success is a DMPC, a character that I particularly am fond of. And as if you were at the panel yesterday, you know that this character is Toik. It's a hedgehog cleric that can magically get into every single space that my characters are stuck in. And so that character can pop up and kind of be my Deus Ex Machina, help them get through that. He was not present in the Butt Kraken. They figured that out on their own. But for example, Toik has a history of being a librarian and stuff like that, so that you can kind of go in and say, hey, you're doing this. I'm part of this now with you. Let's collaborate to create the next part.
I again cannot overstate my love for Toik. Moving.
Right.
So one of the best advice pieces that I've ever given anybody and that I continue to give every time we do a panel like this is a thing I call building the tracks while the train is going. This is most frequently useful when you are running a campaign yourself rather than writing something full on as a module. But what I recommend, but you can do this for modules, and I recommend it very, very highly. Write the chunks that you have in your head. You're always going to have like, okay, I've got this really cool like Fey forest idea. I've got this really cool spooky haunted castle. I've got this really cool Yeti encounter. Write all of them completely disconnected from each other. And then as your players make decisions, click those entire completed chunks in front of them as you're going. That way you have a lot of content ready to go. It looks like you've prepared for everything. That's a lie, but it looks like you did. And you have something for whatever your players do. Because if they are taking a fork in the road, there's a cool, icy mountaintop they need to go through on this one. There's a spooky haunted mansion over here. They're like, cool, let's go to the, cool icy mountaintop. Cool, you got that spooky mansion encounter for later when they go to a town that they didn't know that was on the other side of the mountain. Oh, look, there happens to be a creepy haunted castle there. Who knew? And you still have that content, and it buys you time as you're working on more content to create.
Yeah, my best advice is sort of related to that, but less like, oh, well, they went a direction I didn't plan, but I've also got something planned for that. Mine is just straight up unearned self-confidence in what you're doing. You just keep your poker face when they tell you they're going to just blow themselves out of a kraken's ass, and you're just like, all right, let's go with it, and lean in. Just lean into it, act like it doesn't faze you. You maintain sort of your like authority at the table that way, but also like feel free to just shrug it off and be like, all right, guys, this is weird, but let's just go with it. But yeah, just don't act like things faze you, and they're going to think you're magical because they have no idea what's on your piece of paper.
Lie to your players, guys.
That's not what I said.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So yeah, not just lean in, but also don't be afraid to lean on the players themselves. The DM is another player out there. You're engaging with the game, you're engaging with it mechanically, you're in the world as well. And it's the responsibility of every player at the game to make sure that every other player is having a really good time, honestly. And that includes the DM. So buy your DM pizza. So
Give them at least 2 days notice before you cancel on them.
there you go. So a lot of times you can kind of get around that or get around a very unexpected thing just by like a player's like, I'm going to do such and such action. And you're like, what do you think is going to happen through that? Here's what I see the consequences being. Here's what you're trying to do. And sometimes players will not really telegraph what their ultimate intentions are. And I think that comes out of a lot of experience with antagonistic DMs. Your purpose there is to make sure the players have fun. You challenge the characters, not the players. And sometimes players have to be coaxed out of that a little bit. So you can just ask questions. What's your character's morning routine? What are they doing in this scene? How are they reacting to another character doing something to keep that prompt going and keep that engagement into the entire thing? And then when they do that unexpected action, you're like, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think the results of this are going to be? And if they come up with something better than what you planned, roll with it. Because always roll with it if they come up with something better than you planned. You're like, yeah, you figured it out.
Yeah.
And you look like a genius.
It's called a collaborative storytelling game for a reason. The thing I would recommend is have some stuff pre-prepared, kind of like Alex was talking about, but have it be really, really vague stuff. Like, I usually have a couple of NPC ideas. I usually have a couple of location ideas, a couple of monster ideas that are just quick, like, you are not going into the forest today. Interesting. Well, you're headed east on the road, and there is a caravan of goblins, and they are selling things.
Growlers. They're selling growlers.
Yeah.
Please interact with these goblins while I figure out what you are doing today. And quite frankly, if you are willing to give your players that kind of agency, you can give them the occasional NPC to play, or you can even have them have like fireside chats or things like that while you are frantically flipping through books and scribbling things on paper and hoping that you could put together something cohesive enough that it looks like you didn't just put it together. On kind of that note, What are some things that you all would recommend people do to keep that pressure off a little bit, to kind of like, I don't know if it's like a post-session decompression thing with your players, or if it's something where you engage your players into like, so for instance, something I would recommend is, as part of your session 0, which is something Neil mentioned very early on, talk to your players about what they want to see in their campaign, but also what they want their characters to experience in your campaign. Because then when you're writing, you can be like, well, I know they want to do a masquerade ball heist. So I can set that up. Obviously, that's not going to be a session 1 thing. Like, that's kind of big, but we can build to that. And the whole time that we're like, all right, we're going to set up this heist and we're going to plan this heist, that one player is going to be like, I'm ready. Let's do this.
It's me. We're referring to me.
So yeah, the best advice I would have there is just to as I said, enlist your players. Never be afraid to talk directly to the players, even if you're not talking to the characters. If a character is really fouling up the adventure or acting out of genre, other players can kind of be enlisted to be like, hey, like we said, this is going to be a fairly serious campaign. Let's keep the comic relief to a minimum. And if someone keeps doing that, or you have a problem player, then you have just that, a problem player. It's not something you can address in game. It's not something you can do a module with. The only way to address that is to stop the game and take the player aside and be like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Like, so don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to directly engage the players, even as you're challenging the characters.
Yeah, just adding on to that, we do a lot of these panels, and a lot of times they turn into Q&As, which we love. But it's funny because a lot of the questions we get deal with how to handle problem players. And, for the 50 different versions of that question that there's one answer. And it's be an adult and talk to your player like an adult about the things that they're doing. There's no, like, if that's difficult, then there's no easy answer for that question. You just have to treat it like what it is.
Yeah, you say, did you talk to them? And they're like, no. And it's like, what?
Well, yeah. Well, there's your problem,
Yeah.
But as far as like engaging players on like a more positive way, one thing I like to do after I finish a session, not a campaign or like a multi-pronged adventure, but just every session, I like to do a here's how the sausage was made kind of discussion as sort of a debrief. And it started when it became very obvious that I was making stuff up on the fly at some of these brewery games. And some of the folks who would play very regularly at my table would be like, so how long did it take before we deviated from the things that you planned? And then we'll just start having a conversation about it, and they'll see where their choices influenced the direction I took it. And it keeps them engaged. It keeps them feeling like they're a living part of the world building, not just from session 0 or initial input, but just with every little decision that's getting made in the storytelling, they are having an influence on it. And some people don't like doing that because they like to keep sort of the mystique of it. And I think that's fine, like while you're running the session. But afterward, when everybody just sighs and you sort of let your guard down a little bit, just bring them into the tent and talk to everybody about sort of like, well, you guys really screwed me there,
For brewery games, that's also important because they didn't always have Brandon as their GM. So sometimes they'd sit down at a table and be like, okay, so what are we doing about like the flaming squirrel centaur? And I'm like, I'm the what?
Yeah,
Where did you
they come
guys
back for
go?
the follow-up session and have a totally different group and a totally different GM.
Does
and
it
be like,
does
what?
it have the upper body of a squirrel and the lower body of a horse, or like what?
Yeah, this is my fault. This one's mine.
Yeah.
It's
So it's a
lower-
squirrel's lower body, but then another set of arms.
It's a squirrel's tail, and then a horse's ass, and then and then a squirrel's back legs, and then a horse's front legs, and then a squirrel's neck and a horse's.
That's horrible, and I
If it
love
had
it.
to wear a T-shirt, where would it put its arms?
and it's on fire.
I cannot emphasize enough to you how many times we've done post-brewery game like conversations because everybody's talking about the cool adventure they just went on. And I one time had someone take me aside and go, "Are we all running different adventures?"
You
I
were
was
playing
like-
at Alon's table, weren't you?
Yeah, she was.
Yeah, of course she was.
So one of the things that is mostly for me is I have a crippling need for validation, as many of us DMs do.
You're great at it. That crippling need is something I love about you. You're great with that.
Just this will keep me going for hours. Anyway, So one of the things that helps me out a lot is after sessions, especially after like really big event sessions, because there's always, whenever you're running a long-term campaign, there are some sessions where like they're hanging out, they're shopping, it's pretty low key. Then there are like sessions where it's like, oh my God, I just watched my whole family burn to death. This has been very serious. There's both the safety, like the safety tools of pulling players aside, making sure everybody's comfortable, making sure that everybody has a way to get out of things that they're not comfortable with. At GG, we have throwing an X. You throw up your hands when something happens that you're not comfortable with and just rewind, continue the story without that part for whatever reason. Sometimes things will just change up a little. Sometimes you have to kind of rewrite some stuff, but you get to rewind and change. But one of the things that also helps is asking your players what they liked and what they want more of. A lot of times DMs try to approach this as, so what do I not do for you to have fun? When in reality, you really just want to give them the stuff that they enjoy. If you have one player who like the thing that they want is like this cool epic story, then you can like work on that. If there's one character that wants to do a lot of dumb comic relief stuff, then you can write the space for that. But if you never have those conversations and you don't know, you can really, really cross wires and players don't get the game that they were hoping to get.
Yeah, and along that line of, having safety tools, I think that's incredibly important. One of the things that we do when I'm running public tables is we have cards, like literally just index cards you throw up, it has an X on it, rewind it, reset, all that stuff. No questions asked whatsoever. In terms of addressing that, how do you decompress and give that kind of feedback stuff too? Honestly, one of the things that I've done when I'm running either a session, quite frankly, even just for friends, is as a lawyer, I really like systems. Sometimes I love chaos, but sometimes I love systems. So one of the things that I've implemented is literally an anonymous comment box where any one of my players can say, I really loved this, or I wasn't a big fan of this, or hey, this is something I really want to try, and you did this in this last session, and I'd love to pull that thread some more. And that way, there's so many free tools. You literally just Google anonymous comment box, and it'll create an anonymous comment box for you so that your players can literally give you feedback, and you don't have to say, okay, well, this is Frank. Keeping in mind, this is Frank. So Frank's he likes to murder everything, so you kind of write it for him. If it's anonymous, you're writing it for the group, which is important. So
Can I? So just to bounce off one thing that you said, safety tools are incredibly important in any game, whether you're just using an X card for a convention game or whether you do a Lines and Veils session during your session 0. There are many safety tools available online with an easy Google. Monte Cook Games has a really good stoplight chart that you can kind of tick off and just talk to your players beforehand. If someone is like, this is the World of Darkness, or this is Curse of Strahd, it doesn't need safety rules. It's supposed to be dark and edgy. That's a red flag. Do not game with them.
Yeah.
I'm utterly serious.
Yeah.
That's very true. And there are way too many people out there who are willing to push those boundaries. And I'm going to tell you right now, you may not realize that you have limits on those things. You do. Yeah. You for sure do.
There's a huge difference between pushing a character's boundaries and pushing a player's boundaries. Those are two wildly different things.
I was running a game of Vampire, and I went through Lines and Veils. I went through some Spotlight stuff at the start of the campaign. I was like, okay, what do you not want to see? And they all did that. And then in a somewhat early session, a character put their hand on someone's face and used a power to make it like shrivel up, basically. It mummified someone's face. And I described the afflicted person's eyes as like, let's just say I described the mummification process gruesomely. And one of my players freaked out. He's like, I have a problem with eye trauma. And I'm like, I'm sorry. So I stopped the game, and I talked to him privately. I was like, I apologize. I didn't know. And he's like, honestly, I didn't even think of it during the session. And I was like, no harm whatsoever. Just, again, communication is the key to any intimate relationship.
Yeah, and one of the things is that, you're running games. This is fun. Mm-hmm. And while you might want to drive home that dark and edgy story and have that huge about face on something, you need to be ready to pivot if something you plan creates a dramatic discomfort, even slight discomfort that somebody expresses to you. You need to be actively listening to your players. Otherwise, frankly, if you're not actively listening, it's not a collaboration anyways. I'll tell the story, and this one's literally live. It's on a VOD on Twitch if you want to go back and look at it. I was DMing a charity stream And wonderful group of players. It's the confectionery stream team. They asked me to come in and be their DM. And I wrote this campaign, or this set of adventures, rather, and it was all about these folks going into the woods and fighting these spider demons. Sounds cool. We do session 0, do everything, like buy the book, and we go live, and one of my best friends in the entire world, we get in, and she says, okay, so by the way, what's our big bad evil guy? And I'm like, oh, it's a spider. And she's like, oh no. And we're literally live. We had gone live 5 minutes before. And I'm like, okay, do we need to talk about this? And she says, no. Keep in mind, at that point, you need to take her aside and say, no, but seriously, is everything okay? I didn't. I made a mistake. And we kept going, and they started seeing that literally every single thing they were fighting was an arachnid. And she messaged me on Discord and says, arachnophobia is my biggest phobia, and I'm literally about to pass out. And we stopped the charity stream temporarily, said, you know what, everybody, we've been doing this for an hour. It's time to take a stretch break. And we muted everything. I called her. All of a sudden, came back. All the spiders were dead. All the spiders were dead, except for the last one, which she said, no, I want you to keep the last one because I'm going to do an epic moment. And I'll let you guys go back and watch it. But she actually, it was a really good moment for her. She actually kind of conquered a fear there that day. But yeah, don't mess with it. If anybody has any hesitation, pause. It's on twitch.tv/justseum, JUSTSEUM. She is amazing. Follow her everywhere.
So I want to open things up for questions, but as you all are coming up with questions you might have for us, I'd like to do a round of quick tips for specifically dungeon creation. Ooh. Neil, if you would start us off.
Okay. Quick tips, steal liberally. It doesn't matter what adventure module it's from. You can reskin it however you like, and they'll never know. Any preparedness you do for any campaign, and if it's a left hallway that the players never turn down, you can keep those rooms, and you can use them in future modules. And if they're in Baldur's Gate and they decide to wander into the vampire cemetery, you can throw a little Curse of Strahd in there. No one's going to know. It'll be fine. So steal as much as you can and be shameless about it.
Yeah. Mine has to deal with sort of my particular way of looking at things and analyzing them, but use logic. Like, the dungeon is probably going to be alive to a certain degree. Like, there's going to be monsters roaming around in it. People aren't just going to be posted up in a room waiting to jump out at you when you walk by. There probably needs to be multiple entries and exits from the dungeon for it to make sense. If you have like a bunch of tiny hallways that lead to a giant room with a giant thing inside it that clearly didn't come from the dungeon, have a reason, at least in the back of your head, how that got in there, an explanation for it, just so there's an internal logic for what you're doing. That's like a behind the scenes thing, but I think it helps the dungeon feel more real if you look at stuff like that.
I think we've all moved a sleeper sofa before.
I feel weird about how counter mine is to yours. You can put stuff in Dungeons and Adventures and not have the reason for it fleshed out yet. Partially, you can rely on your players, because 9 times out of 10, if your players say, I think this is what it is, it'll be a better idea than you'll ever come up with, because it's really, really cool, and you're just like, well, it is now. And then they get to feel super, super smart for thinking about it, because, you had it planned all along, right?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it, you aren't being counter to me, because I'm saying, like, have an idea in the back of your head. Like, if they come up with one that's better, that's cool.
You don't even need to have the idea in my mind. Like, if you have an internal logical structure to what is happening overall, if you have just sort of this idea that comes forth from the internal logic, it doesn't have to have a reason until they get to it and you figure it out later.
Yeah, ask
preference.
Ask your players questions. If they come across someone who's been magically trapped in the bottom of the dungeon and, is about to fight the party, and one of the players goes, what did he eat down here if he's been trapped down here for like centuries? And you're like, that's a good question. What do you think? And they're like, maybe it's like a magic curse. And I'm like, perfect. It totally is.
That's the Uno reverse card of dungeon writing.
It's the no you. I got 2 small tips. One is, you think of a dungeon, it's not always a dungeon. It could be anything. It could be a house. It could be a car. It can be A kraken. Okay, here we go. So think about when you're trying to flesh that out, think about what would go on in there exactly. Or, frankly, leave some things up to chance, because if you're able to react to your players, you can create random encounters. And random encounters, not necessarily like a combat encounter, but something random happening, fleshes out the world that you're in. Say that you're in a castle. It's a beautiful castle. Well, is it always just a castle? Do they have tours of the castle that go around sometimes? Are you going to see somebody randomly propose at the top of a parapet? Do they say yes? That's the other question. By the way, congratulations, you two, on your recent engagement. See what I did there? And another thing, I just wanted to say that the idea of being able to listen to your players and say, oh, that's a cool idea, reminds me of the Instagram meme that I've seen, giving credit to Instagram, of course, where the GM said, in the distance, you see a warehouse. And then the player says, oh, is that like a werewolf, but a house? It is now.
Yeah, somehow cartographers always forget to put bathrooms in the castle.
Yes.
And I'm being half facetious, but a lot of times they do. And the people have bodily functions; they're going to need to go somewhere. When you're describing a location in there, don't neglect all 5 senses. Try to work at least 3 senses into a scene at certain points. What they're hearing, what they're smelling, what they're seeing, what they're sometimes tasting. Mm-hmm. What they're feeling.
Yeah, I wrote one at one time to challenge myself, and it took place entirely in a magical darkness.
Oh.
So the dungeon master had to describe everything in terms of touch, sound, and smell, and taste, like if they want to lick the wall. But it was more of like an exercise in like, can I do this? And the answer was sorta.
I want to play it.
Yeah, try something like that, just to set a goal for yourself to see if you can't design a small few room dungeon where you have to sort of stretch yourself on your descriptors that way.
I want to play with Devil's Sight, though.
Actually,
That is a one-page dungeon available on Goblins and Growlers Patreon. That's patreon.com/goblinsgrowlers at the $25 level or higher. Go ahead, Neil.
actually, that's a really interesting side point. Who here has watched Daredevil on Netflix? Show of hands. Just okay. So has anyone turned on the assisted audio? So Daredevil was the first Netflix show to do visually impaired assisted audio. And so in between the snippets of dialogue, there is another narrator just basically narrating everything that's going on the screen. And Netflix has this for a bunch of shows. That's an incredible tool to help teach you how to narrate a scene, what is going on in there, because they are quick and they are absolutely good there. So if you want training on how to narrate it really quickly, you don't need to read a big long passage of read this aloud to your players. You need to be just thinking and trained in those techniques of how to quickly describe it.
And also watch Daredevil again, because why not?
Yeah.
The thing I'm going to say about dungeon writing is keep a lot of it broad strokes, because as your players start to engage with that dungeon, you're going to see what sorts of things they want to see more of in that dungeon, and you can then kind of narrow it in. I know that's tricky. I know that's not super easy. I find it's made a lot easier by the index card thing I was talking about earlier. Also, there's tons of tables for things like random encounters, super helpful as well. But the more you can lean in, as we've been saying this whole panel, to what your players want to be doing in that dungeon, the more fun the whole table's going to end up having.
Unless you hate your players.
Don't hate your players.
Hate the game.
Hate the game. Yes. So, do we have any questions out in the audience? I suspect we do. Let's start all the way on the left.
Hey, so I'm more of a forever player, so I'm asking this as a player to GM. I am about to start another game. This GM typically does long-term, 3-year campaigns.
Oh my god, that's awesome.
We just finished 2 of those recently, But so this is a particular GM who pretends he likes feedback, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you convey feedback in a meaningful way?
I have a question for you. Have you spoken to them about this? Okay. All right. We've crossed the first threshold.
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
You tell them, and they're like, oh yeah, totally, and they're just like, nah.
So is it more that they're rejecting the feedback and they're aggressive about it, or is it more they're like, yeah, sure, buddy, and then nothing changes?
Yeah, I think it's more the second one. I feel like one, I think that they're taking it in, and then they're not being okay.
I have another question for you. Did you follow up on your first question after that experience with, hey, friend, I feel like we talked about this and nothing's changed?
Have you tried plugging it in?
Yeah.
How do you do that without, admittedly coming across as a jerk?
No, you're not a jerk. You're like,
The GM puts in all this work.
you're not. I don't think you're being a jerk. You're being like, hey, I really love playing in your game. We talked about this, like, in terms of like, you wanted some feedback. We gave it to you. You said, okay, cool. Like, let me incorporate some of this. And then I feel like nothing's really changed. Don't use I feel statements because that's weasel wording it. Say like, nothing's changed. Is there an issue with the feedback we gave you? Like, what are you looking to get out of, like, talking to them? Like, what are you looking to get out of the game?
Yeah, because also remember that the GM and DM is you're a player too. So, but to take the bull by the horns on the question is, yeah, communication is key. Communication is number one for everything. And it's literally saying, hey, as Brandon said, we talked about this. I did not feel that this was heard. What can I do to better convey what I'm saying to you? That way we can, try and do this. Or if you kind of heard me and said, oh, I'm just not going to tell him, but I'm not going to do it. Why do you hate me? No, I'm kidding. Don't ask him that. But why?
So being a DM or a GM in any kind of game always ends up being to a certain level a kind of customer service position. That just, it does. You laugh, but as somebody who works in a customer position that does this, yes, it is. But you also have no obligation to your DM outside of like courtesy and respecting the work that they put in. It is not a disrespect of their work to go, as a player, this is a thing I am asking you, the GM, to help me have in my games. If you're doing it for 3 years, man, look, you can be gentle and kind with your delivery, which is absolutely, the courteous way to do it. But you're not being a jerk by saying, hello, I have needs. I see you did not attend those needs. Perhaps I need to rephrase. Here are the needs once more.
Have you ever caught any feeling of enmity from this person? Like, if you keep asking
Do you need a
questions, they
lawyer?
might push you out of the game.
Just sharpens a knife when you come into the room.
In a weird way, for such a great shit, he's kind of, I want to say maybe socially oblivious if that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, so he's one of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Because here's just my very limited pinhole of a window into your situation. It feels like you all have been playing together for a long time, so you all probably like each other. You all probably have a good relationship. Again, I don't understand your group dynamics, but it seems like this would not be the straw that breaks the camel's back, that you could be like, hey, we're all trying to have fun here. We don't really feel like our feedback's been heard. Let's all talk about it. Like, maybe I'll go out to dinner or something, get away from the gaming table and just talk about it that way.
Yeah, that's a really good way to come in as a unified front, not stand in a row and intimidate the GM, but just be like, yeah, we're all kind of on the same page about this, and maybe each player gives an example of how they felt like they weren't heard or something like that. And you can do that in the post session cooldown, the post session discussion. If it happens a third time, if it doesn't get changed a third time after you've had those first two discussions or so, just stop the game. Say, can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just talk to the GM and be like, we talked about this. Bro.
And I will say the way not to do it is to post about an RPG horror stories Reddit, and then after it goes viral, give it to them and say, this is what everyone else said.
Yeah.
I have a friend that was done too as a GM, and it broke her spirit.
Oh.
So yeah, don't do that, please.
The final thing I want to add to that is it is, again, a collaborative storytelling game.
Yeah.
The best solution, if this person is literally just not picking up what you're laying down, they are interested in giving you the things you want, they are interested, and they just don't know how, so they're not doing it. The solution might be, hey, I had a plot beat that I really wanted to get into my character arc. I want to sit down with you and work on what that might look like so that we know it goes in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I love it when players do this. Please do this.
Yep.
We have, I imagine, several GMs in the room. Who would like their players to do that? Yeah, that's a lot of hands.
and the rest of you either aren't GMs or you are and you don't, which is the hilarious part of that.
All right. We had a question right here.
Yeah, a lot of dungeons that I write end up kind of trap heavy, mechanical challenge heavy. Do you have any go-to mechanics or favorite tricks for engaging and drawing creativity out of like classes that aren't like the rogue type who just sneak around and fix things?
And we should repeat the question for the YouTube too.
So,
Yeah.
so the question is, they're running a lot of dungeons that are trap heavy and have more of those kinds of mechanics. And how do you engage player characters who are not so good at maybe getting into traps and disabling them? And real quick, I'm going to give a super short answer, which is every class can disable traps their own way.
Yeah.
You don't need to get to the switch and like get underneath it with your thieves' tools and pry open the one circuit that makes the whole thing work. You could be a very large character that throws rocks at things until they break. You could be a wizard who sets fires to large wooden structures so that nothing works anymore. There's options. And the big thing that's tricky, that's going to be tricky for you as a GM, is figuring out how can everybody at my table disable this trap without having thieves' tools. And that's leaning in on that, maybe a little bit trickier, but if your player characters are getting into that room and they're like, oh, well, we don't like, oh, I guess the rogue needs to go forward again, feel free to offer an alternative and be like, well, you do see a chandelier hanging immediately above the tripwire. Mm-hmm. And then the ranger's like, oh, yes, I could do something with that.
I have a question for you. So you're talking, the dungeons you're designing are really trap heavy. Are you getting like a feel from your players that maybe they're like sort of getting tired of that mechanic with lots of traps?
Well, it's been a while since I've DM'd, and since I've written my own dungeons, but you know, I'm trying to get back into it, trying to get back into that design mode, and I just love traps. I just think they're hilarious.
Traps are fun.
Yeah.
So, you know, I just want to start asking myself those questions, like you said, like how do other characters interact with this potential challenge?
I will say, but one of the things to keep in mind is that oftentimes the dungeons you go into, like I said, they're not always dungeons. Sometimes they're a kraken. But the dungeons you go into, people are living there. And you know, like, not everybody's Kevin McAllister. And so it would be really annoying if you have to go into your house and, you know, oh crap, I gotta remember there's a tripwire here, or there's a ball that's gonna squish me. So keep in mind that when you're creating those dungeons, people live there, or something lives there. And you live there?
I have a comment when you're
Oh, I thought you were gonna say you live there. I was like, okay.
My house isn't the cleanest, but it's not quite that yet.
And so kind of what makes it look lived in, and so it kind of goes back to creating the dungeon thing, but keep that in mind.
I went the entire other direction because I was really looking to try to, again, like challenge myself with something weird. So I just started writing, I wrote 9 new traps. Like I just came up with the mechanics from ground zero on them. And I'm like, well, these don't make any sense putting these all in the same place. So I wrote a dungeon that was nothing but those. There was no combat in it or anything. But the conceit of it was that the dungeon was designed by a Banksy-esque trap designer who designs artisanal traps to shock, awe, and delight the public. And
You created Saw.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the party was tricked into going in there under false pretenses, and they were led through with a series of clues and reveals with a bunch of traps that were designed to scare them and then ultimately not hurt them. And so they would come out at the end shook, but fine. And there are also a lot of multi-stage traps in there too, because they get through it and they're like, oh, this is fine. And then the next part happens and they're like, oh, damn it. So, I mean, maybe try some outside the box stuff like that too.
That is another one-page dungeon available at patreon.com/Goblins Growlers at the $25 or higher level.
And also just kind of keep in mind that if in the news later on there is a house that has a lot of weird artisanal traps, it was not him.
Yeah.
His lawyer said so.
So D&D is fundamentally a combat simulator that's geared towards dungeon challenges. That's what it is. It's what it has always been. It descends from war games. And it doesn't necessarily do stuff other than that super well. There's a lot of other systems, a lot of other games that do that better. But that doesn't mean that you can't throw in social challenges. You can't throw in mental challenges to like traps and puzzle them. Even a group like a group of monsters can provide a physical challenge. The fighter's like, finally, I get to no more traps. I get to just hew through people. And think about what each class excels in, and think about what you can do specifically to challenge them. Maybe it's a magical trap, and thieves' tools won't work on it. Sorcerers finally my time to use knowledge arcana. Yeah.
Jumping off that a teeny bit, one of the things that can be really, really useful is if you ever enjoy games like Fatal Frame or Silent Hill, a lot of times those will have really interesting puzzles that you can take and twist and put into the dungeons that aren't so much skill challenges, but they are intellectual challenges. So characters that are more focused, like players that are more focused on RPing and less focused on the direct skill challenges, can actually sort of shine there because they have more of a space to have that experience.
Or if you can't, if you're not a Fatal Frame or Silent Hill kind of person, Zelda also has those.
Yeah. And jumping off of that, walk into your local toy store, head to the children's section, look at puzzles, and be amazed by how confused your players are.
Yeah, it's always weird playing like a role-playing game on the computer, and you're going through some ancient ruin, and they're like, solve this puzzle left by the ancients in Sudoku, and you're like, okay, all right.
We've only got about 7 minutes left, so we should
Sorry.
probably
Lightning round.
blow through a couple other
So
questions.
one question, one person answer kind of thing. Just go
Yeah.
bam, 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 bam.
Yeah.
Josh is the moderator. He gets to decide.
Whoever feels like they're best qualified, just jump in. All right. I see a hand most of the way back. Yes, you.
All right, yeah. As DM, what's your philosophy on balance on TPK? If you're not going to include total party kills in games like Dark Heresy or Shadowrun, a lot of the danger in those settings kind of disappears. There's no credible threat. But on the other hand, TPK ruins this elaborative story that you've all been building together. So what's your take on that?
So thing number one, a TPK does not have to completely uproot the story. A lot of times you can have either the characters get reincarnated or a whole bunch of other stuff that can be very liberally and literally changed around story-wise. The other thing that I usually tell you is that there are characters that I have players that are very, very attached to, so I will remove the threat of death. What I will do instead is if they die, they step into the afterlife, and either Kelemvor, if you're playing D&D, or some kind of other entity, the Grim Reaper themselves, like, all right, look, you're not supposed to be dead. You got this whole mythic destiny thing. However, if you're going to come back, I got to take something from you. And that's how they get dexterity disadvantage for the rest of the campaign or something similar, so that it is a permanent risk that they share, but it doesn't take away their precious, precious Babu.
Excellent. Right here with the white shirt and the yes.
Quick thing, merch idea, please make a shirt that says "Be Your Own Practice Bubble."
I will.
I've been writing my first campaign. I've been playing for about 5 years, and they were really long campaigns. How do you rein in your own ambition when designing war?
Don't
ask Alex. That's
No,
the.
my answer to that is don't do that, because if you don't use it in something, you can use it later. Take it away, put it for something, create an amazing world. And if it doesn't work out, if your campaign goes for 2 sessions, cool. There's a lot of lore that you put a lot of time into that can be reused for the next one. I run multiple campaigns in the same world that are overlapping. So if you watch one of my Twitch streams, or it'll be in the same universe as the podcast that I'm about to release, and the characters can interact and stuff. So if you're going in and building lore, save it. Just have fun.
Neil, it seemed like you wanted to jump in with something on that.
Yeah, actually, I kind of have the opposite advice as well.
Ignore me.
Leave spaces for your players to design things and ask them questions. Let them introduce lore and let them start thinking about the ramifications of it. Yeah, so one of my favorite things to describe in games is food. I don't know if you read Game of Thrones, but all the food descriptions are really good in there, and it's a really easy way to bring people into a world because everyone needs to eat. But what people eat, like Anthony Bourdain tells us, teaches you more about their culture than pretty much anything else, because you learn how they eat, who they eat with, what they're eating. And what they're eating, like you can think about spices that go into that. The spices need to come from somewhere else so they get imported. If they're eating a rice bowl, then those rice fields must be somewhere outside the city. And you start creating a world like that. So even just by asking the players, what's your favorite meal in the morning? What's your character's favorite meal or something like that? And they're like, yeah, I love a good like rice porridge. You're like, okay, rice, cool. Got that. What do you scent it with? And like, oh, I like to put cinnamon in it. Cinnamon plants.
Yeah.
Like that's out there. And you start thinking about that. So obviously have lore, have your world. You're a player too. You get to design that. But don't be afraid to leave spaces for them and just ask them to fill it in, because it'll often lead to very interesting places that you never expected and may even work better than what you had planned.
Excellent.
Yeah, we got one in the back there.
All the way in the back.
World building. If you're running with a non-linear sort of world, what's the best way to make the skeleton start?
So the question is, when you're designing a nonlinear world, what is the best way to design that skeleton for it to be a nonlinear world? I'm going to say, since we were running brewery games, I'm going to take this one. When you're designing that world, be aware that your players are going to make choices you never thought of. Have a spine. Just one single thing that's happening. Neil was talking about this earlier. It's things that are happening in the world regardless of the player characters interfacing with it. How that happens may change based on player character interaction, but it's going to happen regardless. You may have other adventuring parties that are trying, succeeding, or failing. You may have a BBEG who's getting more and more and more powerful, and slowly towns are withering away. Whatever it is, it's happening regardless of what your player characters are doing, because then you have something that you can have like news reports on, or other travelers are talking about, or even people fleeing the devastation of whatever's happening.
You're welcome. We got time for one more.
Right here in the front.
So, I was a DM 2 years ago for a campaign, and we had to stop because of a family emergency, but more recently everybody's like kind of getting back together, and they're like, hey, can you be the DM again? And I'm like, I don't remember half of my notes. How do you get back into a campaign like that?
I'll absolutely jump in on this.
Go for it.
So, first of all, your players also likely don't remember everything that happened in your campaign. So have a quick sit-down session where you go, okay, what do you all remember from the previous sessions? Because I don't want to bring back boring stuff that you definitely don't remember.
Roll deception.
Lie to your players.
Whatever they bring up, that's the important stuff. That's the stuff you need to bring back. And I almost guarantee it, because my brain is the same way, 2 years later, I'm not going to remember stuff like that. The things that they say were really important will give you the little synapse connections to be like, oh, yeah. And then, yeah. And if you don't remember, and they don't remember, then no one remembers, and you can write new stuff.
Yeah.
I'll just kind of piggyback on that too. And if they later on remember things, just pull a line from the comic books and just retcon it. So.
Or tell them it's from the multiverse.
Yeah.
Ooh. So that's our time. If anybody up here wants to drop their links for folks to follow. Noah.
Oh, me? I'm crazy. Hi, my name's Noah. You can follow me on Twitter, Twitch, and TikTok at my lawyer friend. I'm your lawyer friend. And also, like I said, we're launching a podcast, Live Play podcast, on Monday. It'll be available on Spotify and Apple Music. It is called Forgotten Paths. You can follow it on Twitter for all the links. Twitter.com/@paths_forgotten. Thank you.
My name is Alex Smith. I am the co-owner of Alpha Comics and Games, and I am the DM for these guys for Quid Pro Roll. That is at Spotify, Apple Music, literally anywhere you can not buy podcasts. That is where it is. You can find me at Quid Roll, I think is the...
At Quid Roll
yeah,
is the Twitter handle.
At Quid Roll or at Alpha Comics Games, because I am only a corporate entity.
Brandon Dingus, one of the co-owners of Goblins and Growlers. I'm at Way of Brandalore on Twitter. Goblins and Growlers is at Goblins Growlers on Twitter. And also, if you think of a question later or you didn't get yours in, we also have a really popular Discord with a lot of helpful people on it, bit.ly/Goblin Discord. Also, go to goblinsandgrowlers.com. There's a link there.
My name is Neil Raymond Price, freelance writer and developer. You can follow me on Twitter and Twitch as @BurntNeal, BurntNeall. It's a reference to the saga of Burnt Njal, which is a very famous Icelandic saga, and nobody gets the reference. And at this point, though, I'm too committed to change it.
Fair. I'm on Twitter at BlackCloakDM. I also want to highlight real quick, Brandon and I have a TTRPG adjacent podcast called the Goblins and Growlers podcast.
We
It's
spent a
so
lot of money
originally
on the
named.
marketing research for that name.
We talk about everything from old modules to stuff that is like the Return to Dark Tower. If you're familiar with the Dark Tower board game, they're remaking it, and that's pretty cool. And we talk about that at some length.
I was going to go for it.
We sorry, I'm Alon. I'm with Goblins and Growlers. There's a panel here tomorrow, same spider time, same spider place, where we're talking about how to launch your TTRPG podcast. If you've done it before, or it's something that you're looking to do, and you want to hear from people who've done it successfully, we will talk to you about that. Oh, and also people who failed too, which is great because you get to learn a lot of things all at once. And also Noah's going to be there. He's one of the people who's done it successfully. I'm one of the failures. So yeah. Come and check that out.
Yeah.
I haven't done it successfully yet. That's Monday. I also want to shout out for you guys. I've gotten a lot of really great content by watching them on Twitch too, the Goblins and Growlers Twitch. It's twitch.tv/Growling Goblins Studios.
Yeah, until we change it again.
Yeah, until you change it again. So.
Yeah. But thanks everybody for coming. We hope to see you again tomorrow evening.
Thank you.